Um, if you don't recognize it, it's Fire and Blood, which is the inspiration, as you can see up at the top here, the inspiration for House of the Dragon, the HBO show. Now, I've seen the show, and it was really good, so I just kind of wanted to go ahead and get into the book a little bit. So I figured I might as well just go ahead and read the first chapter. The first chapter is about 26 pages. I kind of looked ahead. So if you guys enjoy reading ASMR, hopefully you enjoy it. And if you don't, hopefully you just enjoy me yapping about something. So bear with me through the video. My fingers look horrible. I'm sorry about that. There's really nothing I can do. And then also, the way I have everything set up with this camera, I have a webcam on a tripod. So I'm actually going to be reading everything off of my computer screen through the camera. So if it sounds like I can't read, then I guess that's why. So we got a lot of reading to do, so let's go ahead and kind of get started. This is what the cover, like the first page, looks like. Just kind of gives you kind of a picture. Some reviews. Fire and Blood by George R.R. Martin. For Lenore, Elias, Andrea, and Sid, the Mountain Minions. Here's the table of contents. Aegon's Conquest. That's the first chapter and the one we'll be reading today. Fire and Blood, being a history of the Targaryen kings of Westeros. Volume 1, from Aegon the First, the Conqueror, to the Regency of Aegon the Third, the Dragonbane, by Archmaester Glyndane, of the Citadel of Old Town, here transcribed by George R.R. Martin. And here's a picture of the dude. Aegon's Conquest. The maesters of the Citadel, who keep the histories of Westeros, have used Aegon's Conquest as their touchstone for the past 300 years. Births, deaths, battles, and other events are dated either AC, after the conquest, or BC, before the conquest. True scholars know that such dating is far from precise. Aegon Targaryen's conquest of the Seven Kingdoms did not take place in a single day. More than 2 years have passed between Aegon's landing and his Old Town coronation, and even then the conquest remained incomplete, since Dorne remained unsubdued. Sporadic attempts to bring the Dornishmen into the realm continued all through King Aegon's reign and well into the reigns of his sons, make it impossible to fix a precise end date for the wars of conquest. Even the start date is a matter of some misconception. Many assume wrongly that the reign of King Aegon the First Targaryen began on the day he landed at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush beneath the 3 hills where the city of King's Landing would eventually stand. Not so. The day of Aegon's landing was celebrated by the king and his descendants, but the conqueror actually dated the start of his reign from the day he was crowned and anointed in the starry sept of Old Town by the High Septon of the Faith. well after all three of the major battles of the War of Conquest had been fought and won. Thus it can be seen that most of Aegon's actual conquering took place from 2 to 1 BC, before the conquest. The Targaryens were pure Valyrian blood, dragon lords of ancient lineage. 12 years before the doom of Valyria, Aenar Targaryen sold his holdings in the Freehold and the lands of the Long Summer and moved with all his wives, wealth, slaves, dragons, siblings, kin, and children to Dragonstone, a bleak island citadel beneath a smoking mountain in the narrow sea. At its apex, Valyria was the greatest city in the known world, the center of civilization. Within its shining walls, 20 rival houses vied for power and glory in court and council, rising and falling in an subtle, oft savage struggle for dominance. The Targaryens were far from the most powerful of the Dragon Lords, and their rivals saw their flight to Dragonstone as an act of surrender, as cowardice. But Lord Aenar's maiden daughter, Daenys, known forever afterwards as Daenys the Dreamer, had foreseen the destruction of Valyria by fire. And when the doom came 12 years later, the Targaryens were the only dragon lords to survive. Dragonstone had been the westernmost outpost of Valyria power for 2 centuries. Its location athwart the gullet gave its lords a stranglehold on Blackwater Bay and enabled both the Targaryens and their close allies, the Valyrians of Driftmark, a lesser house of Valyrian descent, to fill their coffers off the passing trade. Valyrian ships, along with those of another allied Valyrian house, the Celticars of Claw Isle, dominated the middle reaches of the narrow sea, whilst the Targaryens ruled the skies with their dragons. Yet even so, for the best part of 100 years after the doom of Valyria, the rightly named Century of Blood, House Targaryen looked east, not west, and took little interest in the affairs of Westeros. Aemon Targaryen, brother and husband to Daenys the Dreamer, followed Aenar the Exile as Lord of Dragonstone and became known as Gaemon the Glorious. Gaemon's son, Aegon, and his daughter, Elena, ruled together after his death. After them, the lordship passed to their son Maegor, his brother Aerys, and Aerys' son, Aelix, Balon, and Daemon. The last of the 3 brothers was Daemon, whose son, Aerion, then succeeded to Dragonstone. The Aegon who would be known to history as Aegon the Conqueror and Aegon the Dragon was born on Dragonstone in 27 BC. He was the only son and second child of Aerion, Lord of Dragonstone, and Lady Valena of House Velaryon, herself half Targaryen on her mother's side. Aegon had 2 true-born siblings, an elder sister, Visenya, and a younger sister, Rhaenys. It had long been the custom amongst the dragon lords of Valyria to wed brother to sister to keep the bloodlines pure, but Aegon took both his sisters to bride. By tradition, he would have been expected to wed only his older sister, Visenya. The inclusion of Rhaenys as a second wife was unusual, though not without precedent. It was said by some that Aegon wed Visenya out of duty and Rhaenys out of desire. All 3 siblings had shown themselves to be dragon lords before they wed. Of the 5 dragons who had flown with Aenar the Exile from Valyria, only one survived to Aegon's day, the great beast called Balerion, the Black Dread. The itself. A common myth, oft heard among the ignorant, claims that Aegon Targaryen had never set foot upon the soil of Westeros until the day he set sail to conquer it, but this cannot be truth. Years before that sailing, the painted table had been carved and decorated at Lord Aegon's command. A massive slab of wood, some 50 feet long, carved in the shape of Westeros, and painted to show all the woods and rivers and towns and castles of the Seven Kingdoms. Plainly, Aegon's interest in Westeros long predated the events that drove him to war. As well, there are reliable reports of Aegon and his sister Visenya visiting the citadel of Old Town in their youth, and hawking on the arbor as guests of Lord Redwayne. He may have visited Lannisport after all, accounts differ. The Westeros of Aegon's youth was divided into 7 quarrelsome kingdoms, and there was hardly a time where 2 or 3 of these kingdoms were not at war with another. The vast, cold, stony north was ruled by the Starks of Winterfell, and the deserts of Dorne. The Martell princes held sway. The cold, rich Westerlands were ruled by the Lannisters of Castle Rock, the fertile reach of the by the gardeners of Highgarden. The Vale, the Fingers, and the Mountains of the Moon belonged to the House Arryn, but the most belligerent kings of Aegon's time were the 2 whose realms lay closest to Dragonstone, Harren the Black and Argilac the Arrogant. From their great citadel, Storm's End, the Storm Kings of House Duradon had once ruled the eastern half of Westeros, from Cape Wrath to the Bay of Crabs, but their power had been dwindling for centuries. The kings of the Reach had nibbled at their domains from the west, the Dornishmen harassed them from the south, and Harren the Black and his Iron Men had pushed them from the Trident in the lands north of the Blackwater Rush. King Argilac, last of the Durandon, had arrested this decline for a time, turning back a Dornish invasion while still a boy, crossing the narrow sea to join the great alliance against the imperialist tigers of Volantis, and slaying Garth the 7th Gardener, king of the Reach, in the Battle of Summerfield 20 years later. But Argilac had grown older, his famous mane of black hair had gone gray, and his prowess at arms had faded. North of the Blackwater, the Riverlands were ruled by the bloody hands of Harren the Black of House Hoare, king of the islands and the rivers. Harren's iron-born grandsire, Harwin Hardhand, had taken the trident from Argilac's grandsire, Eric, whose own forebears had thrown down the last of the River Kings centuries earlier. Harren's father had extended his domains east to Duskendale and Rosby. Harren himself had devoted most of his long reign, close on 40 years, to building a gigantic castle beside the God's Eye. But with Harrenhal at last nearing completion, the Ironborn would soon be free to seek fresh conquests. No king in Westeros was more feared than Black Harren, whose cruelty had become legendary all through the 7 kingdoms, and no king in Westeros felt more threatened than Argilac the Storm King, last of the Durandon, an aging warrior whose only heir was his maiden daughter. Thus it was that King Argilac reached out to the Targaryens of Dragonstone, offering Lord Aegon his daughter in marriage, with all the lands east of the God's Eye, from the Trident to the Blackwater Rush, as her dowry. Aegon Targaryen spurned the Storm King's proposal. He had 2 wives, he pointed out. He did not need a third, and the dower lands being offered had belonged to Harrenhal, more than a generation. They were not Argilacs to give. Plainly, the aging Storm King meant to establish the Targaryens along the Blackwater as a buffer between his own lands and those of Harren the Black. The Lord of Dragonstone countered with an offer of his own. He would take the dower lands being offered if Argilac would also cede Massey's Hook and the woods and plains from the Blackwater south to the river Windwater and the headwaters of the Mander. The pact would be sealed by the marriage of Argilac's daughter to Orys Baratheon, Lord Aegon's childhood friend and champion. These terms Argilac the Arrogant rejected angrily. Orys Baratheon was a base-born half-brother to Lord Aegon, it was whispered, and the Storm King would not dishonor his daughter by giving her hand to a bastard. The very suggestion enraged him. Argilac had the hands of Aegon's envoy cut off and returned to him in a box. "These are the only hands your bastard shall have of me," he wrote. Aegon made no reply. Instead, he summoned his friends, bannermen, and principal allies to attend him on Dragonstone. Their numbers were small. The Valyrians of Driftmark were sworn to House Targaryen, as were the Celticars of Claw Isle. From Massey's Hook came Lord Bar Aemon of Sharp Point, and Lord Massey of Stone Dance, both sworn to Storm's End, but with closer ties to Dragonstone. Lord Aegon and his sisters took counsel with them and visited the Castle Sept to pray to the Seven of Westeros as well, though he had never before been accounted a pious man. On the seventh day, a cloud of ravens burst from the towers of Dragonstone to bring Lord Aegon's word to the 7 kingdoms of Westeros. To the 7 kingdoms they flew, to the citadel of Old Town, to lords both great and small. All carried the same message. From this day forth there would be but one king in Westeros. Those who bent the knee to Aegon of House Targaryen would keep their lands and titles. Those who took up arms against him would be thrown down, humbled, and destroyed. Accounts differ on how many swords set sail from Dragonstone with Aegon and his sisters. Some say 3,000, others number them only. In the hundreds. This modest Targaryen host put ashore at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush on the northern bank, where 3 wooded hills rose above a small fishing village. In the days of the 100 Kingdoms, many petty kings had claimed dominion over the river mouth, amongst them the Darkling Kings of Duskendale, the Masseys of Stone Dance, and the River Kings of old, be they muds, fishers, brackens, blackwoods, or hooks. Towers and forts had crowned the 3 hills at various times, only to be thrown down in one war or another. Now only broken stones and overgrown ruins remained to welcome the Targaryens. Though claimed by both the Storm's End and Harrenhal, the river mouth was undefended, and the closest castles were held by lesser lords of no great power, or military prowess, and lords moreover, who had little reason to love their nominal overlord, Harren the Black. Aegon Targaryen quickly threw up a log and earth palisade around the highest of the 3 hills, and dispatched his sisters to secure the submission of the nearest castles. Rosby yielded to Rhaenys, and golden-eyed Meraxes without a fight. At Stokeworth, a few crossbowmen loosed bolts at Visenya until Vhagar's flames set the roofs of the castle's keep ablaze. Then they too submitted. The conqueror's first true test came from Lord Darkland of Duskendale and Lord Mutan of Maidenpool, who joined their power and marched south with 3,000 men drive the invaders back into the sea. Aegon sent Oris Baratheon out to attack them on the march, whilst he descended on them from above with the Black Dread. Both lords were slain in the one-sided battle that followed, Tarklin's son and Mutin's brother thereafter yielding up their castles and swore their swords to House Targaryen. At that time, Duskendale was the principal Westeros seaport on the Narrow Sea, and had grown fat and wealthy from the trade that passed through its harbor. Visenya Targaryen did not allow the town to be sacked, but she did not hesitate to claim its riches, greatly swelling the coffers of the conquerors. This perhaps would be an apt place to discuss the differing characters of Aegon Targaryen and his sisters and queens. Visenya, eldest of the three siblings, was as much a warrior as Aegon himself, as comfortable in ringmail as in silk. She carried the Valyrian longsword of Dark Sister, and was skilled in its use, having trained beside her brother since childhood. Though possessed of the silver gold hair and purple eyes of Valyria, hers was a harsh, austere beauty. Even those who loved her best found Visenya stern, serious, and unforgiving. Some said that she played with poisons and dabbled in dark sorceries. Rhaenys, youngest of the three Targaryens, was all her sister was not: playful, curious, impulsive, given to flights of fancy. No true warrior, Rhaenys loved music, dancing, and poetry, and supported many a singer, mummer, and puppeteer. Yet it was said that Rhaenys spent more time on Dragonback than her brother and sister combined, for above all things, she loved to fly. She once was heard to say that before she died, she meant to fly Meraxes across the Sunset Sea to see what lay upon its western shores. Whilst no one ever questioned Visenya's fidelity to her brother-husband, Rhaenys surrounded herself with comely young men, and it was whispered, even entertained, some in her bedchambers on the nights when Aegon was with her eldest sister. Yet despite these rumors, observers at court could not fail to note that the king spent 10 nights with Rhaenys for every night with Visenya. Aegon Targaryen himself, strangely, was as much an enigma to his contemporaries as to us. Armed with the Valyrian steel blade, Blackfire, he was counted among the greatest warriors of his age, yet he took no pleasure in feats of arms, and never rode in tourney or melee. His mount was Balerion the Black Dread, but he flew only to battle or to travel swiftly across land and sea. His commanding presence drew men to his banners, yet he had no close friends, save Oris Baratheon, the companions of his youth. Women were drawn to him, but Aegon remained ever faithful to his sisters. As king, he put great trust in his small council and his sisters, leaving much of the day-to-day governance of the realm to them, yet he did not hesitate to take command when he found it necessary. Though he dealt harshly with rebels and traitors, he was open-handed with former foes who bent the knee. This he showed for the first time at the Aegon Fort, the crude wood and earth castle he had raised atop what would henceforth and forever be known as Aegon's High Hill. Having taken a dozen castles and secured the mouth of the Blackwater Rush on both sides of the river, he commanded the lords he had defeated to attend him. There they laid their swords at his feet, and Aegon caused them up, and confirmed them in their lands and titles. To his oldest supporters he gave new honors. Daemon Valerian, Lord of the Tides, was made master of ships, in command of the royal fleet Crispian Celtigar, master of coin, and Oris Baratheon he proclaimed to be my shield, my stalwart, my strong right hand. Thus Baratheon is reckoned by the maesters the first king's hand. Heraldic banners had long been a tradition amongst the lords of Westeros, but such had never been used by the dragon lords of Old Valyria. When Aegon's knights unfurled his great silken battle standard with a red, three-headed dragon breathing fire upon a black field, the lords took it for a sign that he was now truly one of them, a worthy high king for Westeros. The Queen Visenya placed a Valyrian steel circlet studded with rubies on her brother's head, and Queen Rhaenys hailed him as Aegon, first of his name, king of all Westeros, and shield of his people. The dragons roared, and the lords and knights sent up a cheer. But the small folk, their fishermen and field hands and good wives, shouted loudest of all. The 7 kings that Aegon the Dragon meant to uncrown were not cheering, however. And Harrenhal and Storm's End, Harren the Black, and Argilac the Arrogant had already called their banners. In the west, King Mern of the Reach rode the ocean road north to Casterly Rock to meet with King Loren of House Lannister. The Princess of Dorne dispatched a raven to Dragonstone, offering to join Aegon against Argilac the Storm King, but as an equal and ally, not a subject. Another offer of allegiance came from the boy king of the Eyrie, Ronel Arryn, whose mother asked for all the lands east of the Green Fork of the Trident for the Vale's support against Black Heron. Even in the north, King Torrhen Stark of Winterfell sat at his lords, bannermen, and counselors late into the night, discussing what was to be done about this would-be conqueror. The whole realm waited anxiously to see where Aegon would move next. Within days of his coronation, Aegon's armies were on the march again. The greater part of his host crossed the Blackwater Rush, making south for Storm's End under the command of Oris Baratheon. I'll show off this picture a little bit because it is really cool. I'm assuming this is Aegon, and then this is probably Rhaenys, and then Visenya. Queen Rhaenys accompanied him aside Meraxes of the Golden Eye and Silver Scales. The Targaryen fleet under Daemon Valerian left Blackwater Bay and turned north for Coldtown and the Vale. With them went Queen Visenya and Vhagar. The king himself marched northwest to the God's Eye and the newly completed Harrenhal, the gargantuan fortress that had the pride and obsession of King Harren the Black. All 3 of the Targaryen thrusts faced fierce opposition. Lord Errol, Fell, and Buckler, bannermen to Storm's End, surprised the advancements of Oris Baratheon's host as they were crossing the Windwater, cutting down more than 1,000 men before fading back into the trees. A hastily assembled Arryn fleet, augmented by a dozen Braavasi warships, met and defeated the Targaryen fleet in the waters off Coldtown. Amongst the dead was Aegon's admiral, Daemon Valerian. Aegon himself was attacked on the south shore of the God's Eye not once, but twice. The Battle of the Reeds was a Targaryen victory, but they suffered heavy losses at the Wailing Willows when 2 of King Harren's sons crossed the lake in longboats with muffled oars and fell upon the rear. In the end, though, Aegon's enemies had no answer for his dragons. The men of the Vale sank a third of the Targaryen ships and captured near as many, but when Queen Visenya descended upon them from the sky, their own ships burned. Lords Errol, Fell, and Buckler hid in their familiar forest until Queen Rhaenys unleashed Meraxes, and a wall of fire swept through the woods, turning the trees to torches. And the victors at the Wailing Willows returned across the lake to Harrenhal, were ill-prepared when Balerion fell upon them out of the morning sky. Harren's boats burned, so did Harren's sons. Aegon's foes also found themselves plagued by other enemies. As Archelac the Arrogant gathered his swords at Storm's End, pirates from the Steppe Zones descended on the shores of Cape Wrath to take advantage of their absence, and Dornish raiding parties came boiling out of the Red Mountains to sweep across the marshes. In the Vale, young King Ronald had to contend with the rebellion on the Three Sisters, when the Sistermen renounced all allegiance to the Eyrie and proclaimed Lady Marla Sunderland their queen. Yet these were minor vexations compared to what befell Harren the Black. Though House Hoare had ruled the Riverlands for 3 generations, the men of the Trident had no love for their iron-born overlords. Harren the Black had driven thousands to their deaths in the building of his great castle of Harrenhal, plundering the Riverlands for materials and beggaring lords and small folk alike with his appetite for gold. So now the Riverlands rose against him, led by Lord Edmund Tully of Riverrun. Summoned to the defense of Harrenhal, Tully declared for House Targaryen instead, raised the dragon banner over his castle, and rode forth with his knights and archers to join his strength to Aegon's. His defiance gave heart to the other river lords. One by one, the lords of the Trident renounced Harren and declared for King the Dragon, for Aegon the Dragon. Blackwoods, Malisters, Vances, Brackens, Pipers, Freys, Strongs. Summoning their levies, they descended on Harrenhal. Suddenly outnumbered, King Harren the Black took refuge in his supposedly impregnable stronghold. The largest castle ever raised in Westeros, Harrenhal boasted 5 gargantuan towers and inexhaustible sources of fresh water, huge subterranean vaults well stocked with provisions, and massive walls of black stone higher than any ladder and too thick to be broken by any ram or shattered by a trebuchet. Harren barred his gates and settled down with his remaining sons and supporters to withstand a siege. Aegon of Dragonstone was of a different mind. Once he had joined his power with that of Edmund Tully and the other river lords to ring the castle, he sent a maester to the gates under a peace banner to parley. Harren emerged to meet him, an old man in gray, yet still fierce in his black armor. Each king had his banner bearer, and his maester in attendance, so the words that they exchanged are still remembered. Yield now, Aegon began, and you may remain as Lord of Iron Islands. Yield now, and your sons will live to rule after you. I have 8,000 men outside your walls. What is outside my walls is of no concern to me, said Harren. Those walls are strong and thick, but not so high as to keep out dragons. Dragons fly. I built in stone, said Harren. Stones do not burn. To which Aegon said, when the sun sets, your line shall end. It is said that Harren spat at that and returned to his castle. Once inside, he sent every man of his to the parapets, armed with spears and bows and crossbows. promising lands and riches to whoever of them could bring the dragon down. Had I a daughter, the dragon slayer could claim her hand as well, Haran the Black proclaimed. Instead, I will give him one of Tully's daughters, or all three if he likes. Or he may pick one of Blackwood's whelps or strongs, or any girl born of these traders of the Trident, these lords of yellow mud. Then Haran the Black retired to his tower, surrounded by his household guard, to sup with his remaining sons. As the last light of the sun faded, Black Haran's men stared into the gathering darkness, clutching their spears and crossbows. When no dragon appeared, some may have thought that Aegon's threats had been hollow, but Aegon Targaryen took Balerion up high through the clouds, up and up until the dragon was no bigger than a fly upon the moon. Only then did he descend well inside the castle walls. On wings as black as pitch, Balerion plunged through the night, and then the great towers of Harrenhal appeared beneath him. The dragon roared his fury and bathed them in black fire, shooting through with swirls of red. Stone does not burn, Haran had boasted, but his castle was not made of stone alone. Wood and wool, hemp and straw, bread and salted beef and grain all took fire. Nor were Haran's iron men made of stone. Smoking, screaming, shrouded in flames, they ran across the yards and tumbled from the wall walks to die upon the ground below. And even stone will crack and melt if the fire is hot enough. The river lords outside the castle walls said later that the towers of Harrenhal glowed red against the night, like 5 great candles, and like candles they began to twist and melt, and runnels of molten stone ran down their sides. Haran and his last son died in the fires that engulfed his monstrous fortress that night. House Hoare died with him, and so too did the Iron Islands hold on the Riverlands. The next day, outside the smoking ruins of Harrenhal, King Aegon accepted an oath of fealty from Edmund Tully, Lord of Riverrun, and named him Lord Paramount of the Trident. The other river lords did homage as well, to Aegon as king and to Edmund Tully as their liege lord. When the ashes had cooled enough to allow men to enter the castle safely, the swords of the fallen, many shattered or melted or twisted into ribbons of steel by dragon fire, were gathered up and sent back to the Aegon fort in wagons. South and east, the Storm King's bannermen proved considerably more loyal than King Haran's. Archelac the Arrogant gathered a great host about him at Storm's End. The seat of the Durrandons was a mighty fastness, its great curtain wall even thicker than the halls of Harrenhal. It too was thought to be impregnable to assault. Words of King Haran's men soon reached the ears of his old enemy, King Archelac. However, Lord Fell and Buckler, falling back before the approaching host, Lord Errol had been killed, had sent him word of Queen Rhaenys and her dragon. The old warrior king roared that he did not intend to die as Haran had, cooked inside his own castle like a suckling pig with an apple in his mouth. No stranger to battle, he would decide his own fate, sword in hand. So Archelac the Arrogant rode forth from Storm's End one last time to meet his foes in the open field. The Storm King's approach was no surprise to Orys Baratheon and his men. Queen Rhaenys, flying Meraxes, had witnessed Archelac's departure from Storm's End, and was able to give the hand a full accounting of the enemy's numbers and dispositions. Orys took up a strong position on the hill south of Bronze Gate, and dug in there on the high ground to await the coming of the Stormlanders. As the armies came together, the Stormlands proved true to their name. A steady rain began to fall that morning, and by warriors, almost 2 to 1, and had almost 4 times as many knights and heavy horses. The sight of the Targaryen banners flapping sodden above his own hills enraged him, and the battle-seasoned old warrior did not fail to know that the rain was blowing from the south into the faces of the Targaryen men on their hills. So Argilac the Arrogant gave the command to attack, and the battle known to history as the Last Storm began. The fighting lasted well into the night, a bloody business and far less one-sided than Aegon's conquest of Harrenhal. Thrice, Argilac the Arrogant led his knights against the Baratheon positions, but the slopes were steep and the rains had turned the ground soft and muddy, so the war horses struggled and foundered, and the charges lost all cohesion and momentum. The Stormlanders fared better when they were sent their spearmen up the hills on the foot. Blinded by the rain, the invaders did not see them climbing until it was too late, and the wet bowstrings of the archers made their bows useless. One hill fell, and then another, and then the fourth and final charge of the Storm King and his knights broke through the Baratheon center, only to come upon Queen Rhaenys and Meraxes. Even on the ground, the dragon proved formidable. Dickon Morrigan and the bastard of Blackhaven, commanding the vanguard, were engulfed in dragon flame, along with the knights of King Argilac's personal guard. The war horses panicked and fled in terror, crushing into riders behind them and turning the charge into chaos. The Storm King himself was thrown from his saddle. I think that's probably a good place to stop. I wanted to get all the way through chapter 1, but I'm looking down at the recording and I've been going for about 45 minutes already, so I think that's pretty good. If anyone's still here, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Sorry for my pronunciation of some of the names. They're weird names. It's hard not to sometimes. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, let me know down in the comments, and I will definitely consider continuing and reading some more. So, thank you guys again. If you're going to sleep, I hope you sleep well. If you're not, I hope you feel a little